And today we're doing something a little different from what we were doing before. I wanted to read some spooky stories for Halloween, on top of, doing the costumes and stuff. So I have found a subreddit called r/free horror stories. Essentially, these are royalty-free stories that you can post in the subreddit r/free horror stories, and by posting there, you automatically give permission to anybody who wants to use your story for content. And therefore, as a content creator, you do not have to ask permission, which sometimes makes it easier when you're not the content creator that consistently makes this type of content. And you know how long it can take to get permission sometimes. So all the stories that I will be reading today are licensed under the Creative Commons license. I was going to be showing my face for this video, but I'm extremely tired and I don't want everybody seeing the bags under my eyes. So let's get started with story number 1. Almost killed by drug dealer, the better version. Also, all of these stories are very old, I think at the newest being 2 years old. So first we have Almost Killed by a Drug Dealer, better version by Dark Lord 5689. Hi, I hope you guys are doing well. To fully understand the story, let's backtrack a little. I lost my Uncle Edward to pneumonia in 2014. At the time, I was in elementary school, and I still have the image of his lifeless body sitting in that casket burned into my mind. A few years later, I learned from my dad, my uncle's brother, that my Uncle Edward was an alcoholic and drug addict. My dad had a lot of problems with my uncle lying and stealing. One story that my dad told me about my uncle stands out among the rest, however. This happened at some point in the late 90s. At the time, my uncle and dad were living with my Nana. My dad noticed that the windows on his car were shattered. My dad confronted my uncle about it. My uncle said that kids were responsible. If you ever had to deal with an addict, you will know that they are not very truthful. My dad knew that my uncle was trying to hide something, so my dad gave him a good beating until he told the truth. My uncle did not have a car, so he stole my dad's car to go meet his dealer. My uncle owed the dealer money, but he didn't have any, so he drove off. The dealer shot at the car as my uncle drove away. My uncle was not injured in the incident. This may not be all that scary to some of you, but I thought it was a scary story. Now I have to live with the fact that I had an uncle who I didn't get to know. The next story is from NerdX CoralX Neil, titled, If You Love Me. I love my wife above all else. I have loved her since the moment I first laid eyes on her. I would do anything for her, and that has never changed after all these years. We first met in college. We were both theater majors, and it was one day of Acting 1 class that our eyes met for the first time. Sidebar, I was also a theater major, and I remember Acting 1, and it was so fun. Anyway, back to the story. She had chocolate brown eyes that were complemented by her dark brown curls. We stared at each other constantly that first day. And when we were partnered together, we knew that it was fate. My name is Margaret, she said as soon as I walked up to her after class. I took her by the hand and kissed it. Henry, I responded. She then took one of my long dreadlocks and wrapped it around her finger, staring me in the eyes and biting her lip. It was an amazing meeting, and even better ending later that night. The following night, we went on our first date, a theater production of Sueño. We held each other's hand through the entire performance, and afterward, I walked her to her dormitory. Every day after that was like a love story. We went through good times and bad times. We broke up and got back together. Although, through it all, one thing never changed for me. I loved her and would do anything for her. We got married after graduation and went on to become very successful in stage acting. We were considered a power couple and were always cast in romantic roles opposite each other. It was easy to bring true deep love that we felt for each other on stage, and it was nice to make money from it. One day, our lives took a turn. We had just finished a successful performance of the stage play The Clean House when we were approached by a member of the audience. That was an amazing performance, he said, a creepy English accent behind his words. Why, thank you. You're sweet, said Margaret, gripping her hand. I could tell this guy had creeped her out, but being a talented actress, she was able to put a nice front. I've been watching watching you two for a very long time," he continued, his pale blue eyes staring into Margaret. "I'm very much a fan of your work. Every performance is riveting, and I can tell that you put true passion into your exchanges. You two must truly love each other." "We do," I said, stepping slightly in front of Margaret. "We love each other very much. I would do anything for her." I looked at her, and she gave me that beautiful smile of hers. "That warms my heart to hear," he said as he put his arms behind his back and looking up into the night sky. "True love is a valuable gift that is often taken for granted. If you're not careful, you can easily lose it forever. And it can never be replaced, no matter how hard you try." He then looked at me, and I could see just how disturbing his pale blue eyes were. "Hold on to that. It's a gift. Cherish it forever." He began to walk away before I asked the question that had been bothering me since we met. "Who are you?" I yelled. He stopped and turned his head. "Your biggest fan," he answered. He then walked away. Margaret and I looked at each other, baffled at what had just taken place. Later that night, we were sitting on our couch watching a movie when suddenly there was a knock at the door. "Wonder who that could be," said Margaret as she got up to see who it was. She looked at the peephole and froze in place before taking a single step back and opening the door. Standing just outside was the same man we had talked to earlier that night. He stood there with his arms behind him, his pale blue eyes shining like the moon. "Honey," I said, standing up from the couch to join Margaret at the door. "Please, come in," Margaret said to the man, to my shock. "What are you doing?" I yelled, running to get the door. The man stepped inside before I got there and began to stroke her face. When I finally got to them, I threw my fist and connected it with his face, knocking him back outside. I quickly slammed the door and locked it. I turned to Margaret, who was in some sort of trance. I tried to snap her out of it. "Margaret!" I yelled, shaking her. "Margaret, wake up!" There was nothing I could do to get her to respond. I shook her, slapped her, even splashed water on her face. Nothing would work. Suddenly the lights in the house went out. I looked around until I saw the silhouette of a man standing outside our living room window. I blinked and it was gone. I began to panic and ran to the gun safe in our bedroom. Despite being theater nerds, we were very well trained in self-defense and firearms. We could each hold our own if our lives were in danger, and if there was ever a time to put that training to use, it was now. When I got back to the living room, I immediately raised my weapon. There stood the strange man, holding Margaret by the face. "Let her go!" I yelled, aiming for his head. He looked at me, and the only thing I could see in the darkness was glowing red eyes. He then turned his head to Margaret, and I fired, hitting him directly in the head. He fell to the floor hard, and I ran over. Margaret fell over too, but I caught her before she hit the ground. She still would not respond, her eyes wide open in a trance. I looked over to the man, but he was gone. Gently laid her on the floor and stood up quickly, readying my weapon once again. Suddenly, I felt a strong, tight grip on the back of my neck, and I was thrown across the room, hitting the wall. I groaned in pain as I grabbed my gun and slowly stood to my feet, shaking as I raised my weapon again. Again he had a hold of Margaret, but this time he pulled her head close to his. I felt my heart race and my blood boil as he put her lips to his glowing red eyes staring right at me. "No!" I screamed as I ran toward them. He then pushed her to the side and opened his arms to me, as if inviting me to fire on him again. I obliged and fired 5 rounds into him. All he did was allow them to connect as he laughed. I ran up to him, but he grabbed me by the throat before I could do anything. He pulled me close to his face, and I could see every horrifying feature. Not only did he have demon-like eyes, but his face was covered in disgusting, pulsating veins. In his mouth were 2 sharp fangs and a long, slimy tongue, which rubbed against my face as if tasting me before taking his first bite. I lifted my gun up to the arm he was holding me with and fired twice. He growled in pain as he released me, and I connected the butt of my gun to his face repeatedly. He fell to the floor, and I mounted him, smashing his face more and more, harder and faster. I could feel the blood gush and spray all over as the bones of his skull cracked and collapsed. By the time I was done, there was nothing but smashed bone, brains, and blood. I panted as I stood back and limped over to Margaret, who was now fully unconscious. I shook her, and she finally opened her eyes, looking into mine with fear and confusion. "Margaret," I said, feeling relieved she was all right. I held her close, and we laid there until I looked over to where the body of the stranger had been. He was gone, and panic arose again, and we both stood up quickly. I turned to face Margaret and screamed when I saw him standing behind her, still in the process of regenerating his face. Before I had a chance to react, he sunk his fangs deep in Margaret's neck. She screamed in pain as I screamed in rage, hitting the monster in the skull once again with my gun. I felt bone crack again as he released her. Again I mounted him and went to work, growing exhausted the longer I went. I knew this wouldn't last, as he would surely regenerate again. It soon became obvious what exactly I was dealing with. He had put Margaret into a trance merely by looking at her, even looking through a peephole. It wasn't until she invited him inside that he actually got in. He had glowing red eyes and fangs, and he bit Margaret on the neck. He's a vampire, I thought to myself. While he was down, I ran to the kitchen and grabbed an old wooden brook. I broke it in half and ran back to the body and rammed it as hard as I could into his chest. The body began to convulse, flail his arms and legs. Suddenly, it stopped and went completely limp before melting away into a deep red blood and disgusting fluids. After catching my breath, I slowly turned my attention to Margaret. She sat there in the darkness, legs folded and upper torso fully erect. "Honey?" I said, nervously approaching her. In the darkness, I could only see her silhouette until her eyes began slowly glowing red. There was one thing I could think of to do. I love my wife. I would do anything for her, even if it meant chaining her in the basement, feeding her a pint of my own blood every day, while I figure out what to do about her. When the hunger hit, she became like a wild animal that could not be communicated with. So I fed her my blood, and she became herself again. She understood the situation and never held it against me. It wasn't easy, but it was all we could do. Unfortunately, a pint only went so far, until soon it wasn't enough. So I gave her more until I endangered my own life. It was then that I decided to feed her full meals. Started with animals at first, cats and dogs. Soon I made the hard decision to invite homeless people into our home, knock them out, and give them to her. This went on for far too long before it really started to affect us. She felt like a monster, and I did as well. I loved my wife. I would do anything for her. I'm sitting here writing this shaking with literal blood on my hands as I try to compose myself. She asked me to do one last thing for her. I refused because I loved her too much, but "If you love me," she began, looking deep in my eyes, her now pale blue eyes not blinking, "you will do this." Tears fell from both of our eyes as I pulled her in close. "I love you, Margaret," I whispered. "I love you, Henry," she responded. All I could hear was the squish as I drove the wooden stake into her heart. I trembled as I listened to her whimpers, gasps, and eventual silence. I broke down as her body melted away into liquid. I laid in her remains, sobbing. I sit here now with nothing left but the warning about the creatures of fiction that are very much real. I write my confessions of the crimes I committed out of love. I say goodbye to my friends, or any loved ones that may be reading this. I loved her, and I did everything for her. This last story is called I Love You, and is actually not a Reddit story. It's a story you can find on Wattpad by Lloyd Jones III, or Loika 3, who also happens to be my husband, and so therefore I have complete and utter permission to read this story. After a long day at work, I can't wait to see her. You know the feeling of butterflies in your stomach when you meet someone special? How time slows down or drags when anticipation really sets in. After all this time, I still feel the same. I still get nervous when I talk to her, and we have awkward interactions, but today is a big day. Another opportunity to express how I feel. I arrive at 7 p.m. as previously planned. There she is, I exclaim with my heart racing. She looks at her phone and smiles, and I wonder what she's smiling at. Was she as excited as I am about tonight? I wait a couple of minutes before going into the house to allow her to get settled. I didn't want to rush her. Rush this. I make my way to the door and realize that it's unlocked. Did she do that on purpose? Did she know I was already waiting outside? I smile and make my way in the house, my heart pounding at the thought of her. I lock the door behind me. I don't see her anywhere as I roam the house. I see all sorts of old pictures, some with family, some alone, scattered throughout. I love looking into her light brown eyes. They are so captivating. Today is the best day of my life, and I hope I don't mess anything up. I think I hear a sound coming from upstairs, so I quietly make my way up the stairs, longing for some attention and affection. I hear the shower turn on and some soft music playing in the background. I stop, imagining the beautiful frame that awaits me. Her skin, sweet and caramel, smooth to the touch, standing just beyond the door. I walk slowly in the room to see the rose petals scattered throughout and candles lit. This is a dream. It has to be. Everything was perfect. I hear her on the other side of the bathroom humming to herself. It's a beautiful tune, so calming. Then something unexpected happens. The door opens. Who in the world could that be? I hide under the bed as fast as I can. I hear the creaks from the stairs as a stranger makes their way up. I have to warn her. I have to do something. Conflicted in my thoughts, too conflicted to make a decision. I lay there frozen as I watch for a figure to enter. I hear the soft music playing as the woman of my dreams exit the bathroom. I hear the loud footsteps rushing into the room. She screams as the stranger picks her up. He laughs. She starts to giggle. Happy anniversary, you jerk. I clench my fist. What is he doing here? This fool who doesn't appreciate what he has. She goes above and beyond, but he just goes through the motions. Never doing anything extraordinary for the woman that gives him the world. I would if she... No. When she gives me the chance, she will. Know that I love and cherish her more than this excuse of a man could. They begin to enjoy their evening, and I can't stand it anymore. She isn't truly happy. She isn't satisfied with him. I can't take it. She has to know how I feel. She needs to know what she means to me. I crawl from under the bed and stare at her wonder and beauty. She doesn't see me with the unknowing fool on top of her getting his rocks off. I make it quick, snapping his neck before he realizes what's going on, his body dropping onto the bed. His sudden drop startles her. That's okay. I have her to myself. Her eyes widen as she realizes what's happening. I kiss her on the forehead. She makes eye contact with me, and I can finally say, I love you. Well, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed those spooky stories, and I might do this again next year, depending on how this goes. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to leave a comment and subscribe and like the video because it will help me out a lot as I'm really just starting out for real this time. And of course, I hope you had a very spooky Halloween. Good night.